there's great linkage among the people up here and my wonderful colleague, Miwako, Tezuka. We've done lots of conversations ourselves over the years about contemporary practice and practice from the Asian side of the world. So again, from earlier in the day's conversation, notions of silence. You were very silent, but there were sounds, and I loved when you put the sound icon on, when you put your headphones on. Also, I mean, one theme that came up to me is the idea of now. You all have dealt in different ways, feng shui, or I was looking at your work and thinking, yes, that's pre-recorded, but you're now. Or you were playing with that so gracefully and graciously. And you with space and the, whether that's the Asian Art Museum or some of the other installs, or the now, you getting us to think about our heart and this moment, and you with your work. I love the idea of the bus as the bringing in outside in and getting us to deal with the glass. So would you all maybe just address now, what now means to you and in the present moment or with the past?
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Do you? Oh, she's processing. Oh, sorry. Okay. I guess for me, like, nowness is really what's attracted me to sculpture, and sort of the immediacy of objects, the fact that they have a history of their own, that you have an interactive experience with them in an embodied way. And so I think in terms of awareness, I think it's a simultaneous awareness of my own bodily relation to the things that I'm making, but also an awareness that the objects themselves do have a history and do have kind of a mutability to them.
For me, that's a very big topic. Every time I feel that I'm somehow in a place where, like a dark place, or I've gone to a place that I don't need to be in emotionally or in my presence, I'm not in now. Like, I'm always somewhere else. And it's part of my practice to try to continuously look at myself in the same way we're looking at our hearts and looking at our different parts of our bodies, to bring myself back to that place where all is objective and all is so much more simpler than everything that's going up here. So yeah, now is a big part of my personal practice.
Okay, so thank you, Barbara, for the question. I think it's really a good one, not an easy one. But well, one of the most simple way of thinking about it, connecting to the tram project, not bus project, sorry, which is, of course, the idea of camera obscura. You might see from the documentation that it just looked like a projection from a projector or from the cinema. But the striking differences is that for camera obscura, the moment when you try to contemplate on that single frame will be lost forever. And that is the closest thing to how we experience life itself. So viewing the images on screen as if it's recorded, but it's not recorded, it's also giving us another state of mind in the experience, with this kind of connotation, with this kind of cognition that you know that nothing you see on screen will ever happen in another time. And I have been also on board on the tram for, well, maybe over 50 or 100 times. Every single time when I'm on board, it's different. And that is something that is about now as well.
So I think I do try to make a presentation where our physical presence of being here now, the audience as well as the performer or the presenters is necessary, because I think it is our presence of being here now that you can alter the pace through our breathing or through the movements, where it is something that it cannot be done watching a video or without your physical presence. So.
Can I add just a little tiny thing? It sort of jumped into my head because the question prompted me to think about myself. But your question about nowness reminds me a lot of the common description that I've gotten from animal telepaths about animal consciousness. And this is not only people that engage in more esoteric ways of looking at animal behavior, but also like animal behaviorists. But it's often described as a twilight of a perpetual present, where an animal, for example, your cat or your dog, compiles this continual kind of understanding of its environment, of you, of the people that it comes into contact with, and it's not so much this sort of reflective, very human, ego-driven kind of self-narrativization, but it's that every moment is updated as a result of all of those kinds of cumulative experiences, and they're now all the time, and that's something that's always drawn me to spend time with, you know, our rabbits and my parents' dogs and goats, chickens.
Another thought, and it began with your work, with the performer coming out, thinking of, we live our lives, we usually have coffee in the same cup, maybe, the same mug. We always have the same oatmeal, or so the rituals. And so, do you want to talk about ritual and the sense of speed? It was so slowed down. So I thought of Trisha Brown, or I thought of various earlier performance artists that I'd seen. So I'd love to hear you talk about ritual and time.
Yeah, I think rituals is definitely something that I'm really interested in, especially, I think the reason why I make this presentation, not presenting a project, but instead I like to make a performance, is because I think my practice is I'm not thinking about projects. I'm thinking about practice. And I think I am fascinated and interested in the gestures, the movements of everyday lives, really, especially during the time where it's during preparation of something, something that we don't really look at, or the exchange of service in terms of the labors. And that's what I'm really interested about. So I do try to amplify them and make them into a slower motion. And I think the choice of the pace is to add on the amplification of the movements and the gestures.
Thank you.
I have one comment and question. I guess when I was going over your presentations, one thing that came to my mind is that it's all somehow about a cause and effect. Whether a cause is visible or invisible depends on each artist's methodology and practice. But as an artist, you all somehow engage the audience, and we as audience feel some kind of effect from your work. So you as a, I guess, agent of creation of cause or causes, how does the effect that the audience feel affect you? You know, as a creator and also the receiver of the results of your own work. So that's my general question to all of you.
All right. So Well, the lights was very dim. I couldn't see the movements, so I cannot get the kind of sense of feedback, at least during that small kind of experiments. But of course, this question is not only towards what we've just tried to do, but the idea of feedback and audience participation. Well, for me, like this notion of acupuncture, it's how I use a kind of lightweight intervention, and it triggers a kind of well, energy flow, I would say, and among the audience and among the participants. And for me, I see more as stimulating kind of the stakeholders to take its own force. And I'm not trying to impose something that is foreign. I'm not trying to impose something that as a kind of surgical implementation, but rather it's just a very gentle and precise needle points, which activates a kind of movement of its stakeholders. So I see kind of my involvement. It's very lightweight in that sense, but hopefully it's like a small drop of water, and then it ripples around.
I'll say my sharing was more about you. It was more about, it was reflexive, how we use our energy and how we use our awareness, whether or not we go into something with full attention, blasting outside, or whether we reserve a little bit of that for ourselves. And sometimes, let's say if you're doing something and you intercede, you interject a question in there. How am I using my mind right now? Where am I right now? You're turning the flashlight of awareness back to yourself, kind of like sometimes in a very jarring way. And often you get a reaction. It's kind of like, you know, a voice inside saying, no, you know, don't, there's nothing to see here. Keep it moving. Get back to work. And at that moment, for me, there's a choice. You can either say, yes, I will go back to work, forget it, or you can say, no, this is kind of interesting, and approach yourself and your activity with a renewed interest and curiosity. And that's kind of what I was sharing.
Yeah, I mean, I just to make it a little more conversational, I think that really does connect with me as well. There's something about creating a situation where I think the way that you sort of put it about allowing yourself that moment of introspection to kind of point things back towards you. I think the difficulty for me comes when it starts being about me. I think there's always been something drilled into my head in my own practice of wanting to de-emphasize my own involvement. You know, I think I came out of the research world, and so your own subjectivity and your own kind of choices that are being made at certain points along the process actually corrupt what comes out. And so as I transitioned into making work, I've sort of masked that in a lot of different ways. I like to collaborate. You know, I very early on realized that I know a lot less about a lot of things than a lot of people. And so bringing these people on board, not as sources of information or as materials, is kind of a learning opportunity for me. But I think that this idea of trying to create situations where a viewer can enter a space and be struck dumb almost, where language kind of facilitates the interaction but is insufficient to kind of describe what's actually happening. And those are the kind of moments where I hope to provide situations where people can, I guess, be mindful. But the problem is that I'm not part of that process a lot of the times because I'm too busy running around, like futzing around with stuff.
I think in terms of my relationship with the audience, or the performance relationship with the audience, I am trying to create a very focused moment. for the audience, because what I'm doing, or what the performers are doing, the jesters, they're really very, very small things. They're flipping the book, they're speaking, they're playing with the fruit. Like they're so small where I think it needs a certain precision during rehearsals, or a lot of rehearsals, to create that focus for us to look at very, very small things. So I think that's, so I think, yeah, that's what I'm trying to do in my relationship with the audience.
So thinking of that, should we open it up to the audience? Or, because I think it's great the way you've taken the conversation with situations. It could be museum, it could be Basel, Hong Kong, and the art fair, and each one poses and imposes on you as practitioner, I think. So, these lights are so bright.
First, I wanted to thank everyone for a fantastic panel, but then also just to highlight the juxtaposition with the previous panel. I think this is really extraordinary curation. Thank you, Leeza. But I wanted to ask, actually, Adrian and Junod, we're sensing here actually a very difference of opinion or a difference of approach when thinking about the self. And yet there is a quality to this entire panel which has, I don't know, I think Barbara highlighted it when she talked about now, and then we could also talk about awareness. So there's a quality that flows throughout all the members of this panel. But I think it's fascinating. I have my own ideas, but what do you think the ideas are that unify this idea of not focusing on the self, but then also simultaneously, or in another mode, focusing on the self and what that relationship is? Because Adrian, I don't sense that you could do the work that you do without having a high degree of self-awareness, what your actual subjective experience is in situations. And at the same time, Junod, I can't imagine, the whole idea of participating in a society of Hermetic philosophers cannot be purely about cultivating oneself.
Okay, I'll start. Well, first of all, I'll just say about sort of shying away from focusing on the self. I get what you're saying, Adrian, and I totally feel like I understand where you're coming from. My perspective on that is that you can never escape the participation of your internal process in any work that you do. But by becoming aware of what that process is, you avail yourself of choices that would have operated by default otherwise. You use the word corruption, that you don't want to corrupt sort of what's coming out. And I understand that. I actually use a different word. I use transform, because when I start to become aware of my internal process, it transforms my experience and adds some difficulties which weren't there before, but decidedly some advantages and freedom. And I want to acknowledge that we might not even be talking about the same exact thing, because you're talking more in a sense of your craft and your work. I'm talking about sort of the craft of internal work, of living. So there's a difference there, but somehow the conversation continues to be interesting, right? That's my answer to that. And your second question was about internal philosophers, whether or not being in a community of philosophers, Hermetic philosophers, would be stilting or not satisfying or in some way?
No, the question was that it cannot be just about cultivating oneself.
It meaning what we're doing in life?
The question to Junod, from what I understood from Craig, was that it seems impossible for a society of Hermetic philosophers to be working on themselves for the sake of just the self, the cultivating of the self. And I think you probably didn't get to that part, maybe, or we missed it.
Well, okay, I think that's a great question, and I'll just answer it the way that I see it. One of the reasons why I take the lead of characters or people who I feel have really embodied the direction that I want to go in is to sort of see what's possible, see how others have done it, see, you know, when I fall or when I fail, what maybe I wasn't taking into account or what I can do. And I take, for example, the figure of Marcus Aurelius. That was what it was about for him. He was doing that pretty much all day long. He did a whole bunch of other things. He was probably the busiest man in the world. But at the heart, from a place inside of him, he was always watching and always striving. And my take, looking at his work, is that as a result of that, he experienced profound depth of being and profound effects from for his effort. And so, for me, it's not necessarily about being a Hermetic philosopher, but more just about being.
Well, I think still there's a bit more to that, Junod, because you did mention the concept of why do that? Because when we're creating awareness, and if we are creating awareness for ourselves and we're transforming ourselves, and the experience we're having becomes not a part of the external projections all around us, but an actual experience that we can look from the inside and really identify as for what it is, rather than how it is projected from the outside through our emotions or through other senses. What kind of effect does that have transformationally for us surrounding, you know, our communications with people, and in general, how does that create change, not just for ourselves, but for...
Maybe I could start to answer the previous question and kind of, I can see where you're going.
Thank you.
I think that, you know, we are talking about different things. You know, I think as a person who makes objects and just kind of, you know, tinkering around the studio, there's different objectives. And I think that one of the things that, you know, I meant in no way to criticize the idea of being mindful oneself and to be kind of aware and sort of reflect on one's own kind of position in the world, one's own body, and how things are constituted on a moment-to-moment basis. I think that how I experience making art is almost anti-mindful. It sounds bad. No, it's just that I am so mindful of others that I have to actively quiet my own stakes. You know, for example, there's sensitivities. You know, if I'm working with somebody who's dedicated themselves to the craft of telepathically talking to my rabbit, I don't know any. I will probably never know as much about that field of study as this person who has dedicated themselves to it. So in order to not put myself and take the voice away from the people that I'm working with, whether that's a feng shui consultant or a sound healer or somebody who's engaged in some other esoteric field, I need to keep myself in check in order to allow their voices to shine. And so
But that is awareness.
It's awareness of the situation,
Yes.
but I almost forget who I am in that moment. So I think that going back to what you were saying, you know, you use the example of Marcus Aurelius, and I wonder, you know, there's the presumption that if one is reflective, if one is mindful, that the person or society or individuals will inherently be good. You know, I think that, you know, if a person's a jerk and they own it and they sort of sit there and kind of, they're in the moment. I mean, I know a few people that would be running around on Halloween stealing candy from children, but I'm wondering if if these sorts of precepts or these kinds of these sorts of things were I was listening to you speak and I was imagining being in yoga class, you know, and hearing the yoga instructor, like I love my yoga instructor, Cassie. She's there. She's talking to us. She's guiding our breathing, but she's kind of all encompassing. And that was kind of the model that I was hearing you. I mean, you were standing there stiller than I bet anybody else in the room, feeling your own heart while telling us to feel ours. And that's something it's something that I started to really connect with. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
So in response to that, it just reminds me of what Joyce, during your presentation, it said, we are what we practice, right? So that, like, being able to say that is also a way of self-awareness. So what you are doing as an artist, part of your practice is, knowing what you're practicing and being aware of what other people are, how other people are reacting to your work, or how your collaborators are reacting to your proposals, things like that. So it's the constant awareness of not only the audience per se, but yourself as an artist, I think. And then Joyce, I think your presentation or performance actually really shows that, like, it really foregrounds that. I love the precision of your performance, because there is really focus on what this gesture and what this one gesture can create as an effect. That comes from your awareness as a practitioner of performance art, and then it affects us as an audience.
So maybe in terms of this awareness, for me, it's very important to be aware of how the work itself allows for multiple of readings, and so I'm kind of mediating different audience with very different background, but how, through not providing everything, just providing a kind of reduced level materials or things that, for example, like the camera obscura, every single ride, anyone on board, when they see the opposite image, it triggers in their mind a memory that is the most important there, and from their own, and that brings to surface through this reading, and everyone on board reads it very differently. And for me, it's important that for my kind of awareness is how it allows for multiple of meanings to construct by very different people, and how that then in today's world, it's not easy for this to happen in reality, and how art maybe creates a possibility for this multiple reading.
Yeah, it's multiple readings, it's multiple audiences, and it's chance, or somebody getting on that tram, or someone going into Asian Art Museum and not knowing what is going on. But that's the beauty of art that's challenging, and everybody takes to it their own interpretation. Do we have
How are we
time
doing with time?
We're incredibly on time.
Okay, so a few questions from the audience, perhaps?
If there's a burning question that or comment that from the actual presenters they still want to express something, there's time. I would make just a few short comments, and then we will close today's discussion. So I'm willing to give anyone who wants to ask a question. Oh, Mariam, sure.
Well, I thought that was a really interesting thread connecting all of your presentations that had to do with attention, and actually requiring or even, asking or even requiring of the audience to pay a different kind or quality of attention to the work. So maybe you can just speak quickly if you would, to exactly what sort of attention you're asking for from your audiences.
I think I kind of just answered that.
You're asking of the audience.
I think I just answered that question actually with my previous answer. So,
It's funny. I like to create situations that allow for unfolding given attention, but I don't like to demand attention. I think I really like creating a space where you can kind of, it allows for multiple readings. You know, it allows for casual viewership. It allows for, different kinds of engagement. And I think oftentimes I'm as concerned with the impact that these sorts of projects or these objects have on the collaborators that I've worked with to create them, as I am with the person who's walking into the gallery or walking into the museum space to participate in whatever's there.
So for me, I guess I like the question. I like that question because it really does come down to the type of attention that you want to cultivate. We're a planet of intelligent animals, right? We can build buildings that are, 200 stories high. We can design planes and technology that can take us around the world in short order. We can communicate with people thousands of miles away. So we have capacity. That is a kind of attention that we've brought to bear. We've developed something very powerful. Yet, on the other side of that, we're still involved in so much military conflict. We have personal problems where we're not connected to ourselves as human beings. We are not experiencing happiness and fulfillment on a personal level. And that shows in how we manage the planet. What I'm trying to say is that there are big holes. And I believe that the reason why we have so many holes is because of the type of attention, and that we need to separate on one side, having the raw intelligence to process things intellectually, and on the other side, to have a deeper type of attention that comes from our being. And I think that those two sides will allow us to understand maybe the difference of what we were talking about, the difference that we were having, Adrian. Because for example, if you're aware that you don't need to intercede when you're interviewing somebody who is doing animal telepathy, you're aware of yourself, and you're able to hold yourself back and to marshal your energy in a specific way. That's a positive type of attention that somebody who is about to get into a fight or who is doing something, addictive behavior doesn't have. So in a sense, I feel we're talking the same language, but the syntax is a little bit different. So just to sum up, the type of attention that I feel like we should be developing, or that I'm promoting, is conscious attention that's from a deeper, higher part of ourselves.
I have a mic. Yeah, it sounds like a new age kind of symposium.
Or old age, because we're talking 2,000 years, thousands of years.
Goes in the cycle. Okay, well, yeah, I think this is a really good question, and I see sometimes my practice is casting light on the existing, and the attention is casted on what we don't see often. And sometimes I see I'm not really creating art, but how it's a process of discovering arts of the everyday. The word or the traditional Chinese character of arts, 藝艺, it's, if you're to deconstruct it, it is the characters for planting and weeding, the two components. And when they put together is the idea of art. And from a more kind of agricultural kind of society from the beginning. But then that is something that resonates with me, and that's the idea of arts is maybe a kind of process, a long process through civilization, and it's a process of planting and weeding through time, through long time. And how do we then rediscover a lot of that? And so for me, this is very important in my work, that I'm just casting light on what is already there, but maybe we don't see it. We don't see this process of evolution. We don't see the relationship of things, and it's a matter of how this rediscovery can happen. Okay, happy hour drink.
If you don't mind just staying on stage, I want to thank you. That was really a tremendous discussion and presentations, actually the whole day. And that's what field meeting is all about. I feel like I'm a collector. I don't collect though objects. I don't have the money and probably the space, and but I do collect people. And I am so honored to be able to share with you today this collection of a tremendous people, the kind of work they're doing, the kind of research that they're embarking on, and how they're processing that research, and then how they're actually giving form to all of those discoveries and shape and sharing it in very, very brave, brilliant ways, being very persistent along the way, having to deal with all kinds of misunderstandings and misreadings, because it's very interesting. I felt like actually all of you were speaking the same exact thing, but just it was being said in different ways. And that's the semantics of language, which can really, take us down a rabbit hole of misunderstanding and not misinterpreting. And at the same time, what's great about art is that it does give us that freedom of taking a break from necessarily looking for truth from in one way. There's multiple ways of finding truth, and there's ways of finding or losing truth, and and rediscovering it. And I feel that what's important about the art is the fiction and the poetics, that we can move away from being so literal about things, and finding all these different strategies to create awareness that is inspiring, and is the exact opposite of what is happening in the media and in worldwide movement towards the right-wing direction, where so many things are so authoritarian, and we have the freedom to tonight go home and feast on all these different ideas and thoughts and ways of thinking about what matters in our life, and what is art, and how can we interact with it or live better and discover ourselves. For sure, for me, it is the reason why I do field meeting every year, which is, it takes quite enormous, not just from me, but from the individuals who get invited. Each one of them put themselves on the line. You know, they're asked to do something. I actually ask them to do something very different, to try to come up with something that they may not normally do. This is not a symposium. It's really not a conference. I do think about it as an exhibition. And so, because I'm a curator ultimately. And so the vulnerability, someone was talking about vulnerability, you know, of having to, from everyone, even the moderators were asked to, you know, moderate and put themselves on the line, like not necessarily knowing the presenters. And that's what life is all about, that we can approach it with taking a risk and trusting ourselves and knowing that, you know, the accumulation of all the various different kinds of programming, which I call programming ultimately from our families and our education, and you know, the art world itself is a giant program that we have to detangle and play with all the time, right, in order to make work. What I'm trying to end the note with is that there is really not one answer. Or, you know, two or three, there's so many, and I hope that you will join us for another day marathon tomorrow. Muster the energy and try to come out and be with us, because there's so much more, and parts of the puzzle of what we shared today will actually get, you'll see it coming together, because I am Asian at the end of the day, and I do have a both a deconstructive and a constructing sort of holistic approach towards everything. So I hope you're feeling absolutely energized, even if you're tired, and inspired. And please also go to many other programs we have during the next 2 weeks. Asia Contemporary Art Week seems to continue to expand out of its week and go to, you know, season, 2 seasons, and, you know, or 3 weeks. In addition to field meeting this year, I somehow magically and madly have managed to curate also 9 pop-up exhibitions. I just call them pop-up because it's a very funky name. We love to play with words in the art world. But what it is actually, this time I thought maybe we could juxtapose what's happening in field meeting with you know, actually looking at some projects too. So if you are in town, you have time, please do go see them. Several of them are already open in Chelsea. One is opening tomorrow night. After the end of field meeting, we're gonna go take a shuttle bus and go to Mana Contemporary for Sondong's performance and installation he's been working on for the last 5 days. It's gonna be an amazing experience, so I hope you'll join us. And another pop-up will open in Chelsea on Saturday, so I hope you can attend those. There are great symposiums happening right here at Asia Society next week. The exhibition that's up about Southeast Asia, it gets contextualized by a group of activists and curators and artists coming together to talk a full day. I believe is it Friday? It's on the schedule. Japan Society, the Guggenheim Museum show is up. There's just a tremendous lot. The good thing is that you don't have to squeeze it all in just in the next 2 weeks. Many of the exhibitions are actually open for the next over a month and a half or so. So you can catch things at your own time and at ease. Please do join us if you are on the list for the reception at the Garden Court Cafe right now. Thank you so much.